This didn't start out kind of like something like I planned it to be a live broadcast or an event or anything on Facebook. I just, over the last couple of months, have been really like struggling with what I saw happening in the kind of the relationships deteriorating and breaking down between the community and CPS Energy, the community and the mayor's office. Just a lot of particularly like the way all of that was being viewed and communicated. I've been thinking about the stories, this last 10 years really of being in San Antonio, more 13, working, trying to address the issue that is, our coal plants, our climate pollution, the need to take assertive action and plan shutdowns in a way that protect people. I mean, it's really that simple. And over that entire scope, that entire period, just not finding partners, not finding an open, willing partner at CPS or really among our elected leadership. So there's going to be a little background noise, perhaps. We've had some trouble like setting up, getting the interview software working. I think we're going to move okay on that. But really, I've been thinking a lot about stories that aren't told, stories that aren't told well. And I'm thinking about just like popular media stories that get too little coverage. So over this scope, over this span of time of community working, trying to address this climate crisis, that kind of meta narrative doesn't exist, right? So I wanted to put everything in one location. I wanted to think about what happened around the struggle around the South Texas nuclear project, right? That the community fought against, and when they built Spruce 2 and how that's, evolved and developed, and where we are right now with an initiative petition to move the governance of CPS away from this board of trustees and over to city council, where there's a little more democratic control and transparency. But I'm going to get into all this. There's about a 20-minute kind of pre-recorded segment with some interviews and analysis. I've got some guests put up in the comments that will be coming in towards the end. I hope if everything works right. But yeah, I'm grateful for all of you. I hope everybody's doing well, staying healthy. There's a lot of things to be talking about right now in the community. There's a lot of issues, and I think I keep going back to when COVID kind of like first hit. And we heard from leadership, elected leadership. I'm thinking about that, our vulnerabilities, our historic, racist policies and patterns of development that have privileged, a few over the many, that all of these lended themselves to San Antonio being particularly vulnerable, populations being particularly vulnerable to this virus and to the economic uncertainties and disruptions. And a promise not to go back to what was before. So part of that, is around the utility. A big part of that, I think, is the opportunities that this major kind of component of our daily lives could be playing. That $350 million that goes to the city's coffers, right, could be playing to lift people up. But again and again, we see these practices that push people down. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit. The comments are open on the Facebook. And so add anything in there. I'm not going to be able to respond, but I will as this goes forward. I mean, I can bit by bit, but as we get speakers on too, if you want to line up questions for any of the guests, please do that. And again, just really with a lot of appreciation and gratitude. For decades, concerned local residents have been organizing to move San Antonio off of fossil fuels, responsible for destabilizing the global climate and increasingly violent weather. That work frequently puts us at odds with the leadership at CPS Energy and our elected leaders. In recent months, that tension has led to a fracture in the relationship, a difficult, long-standing relationship between the climate justice community and CPS Energy, as well as Mayor Ron Nirenberg. For many years, the center of this debate has been the 1,300 megawatt JK Spruce coal plant. Though it's been a critical conversation because that plant constitutes nearly half of all of our climate pollution as a city. It's been critical because the overwhelming message of the international scientific community that we move quickly to transition off of fossil fuels to clean energy. It's been critical because we know that this is not as simple as powering down a coal plant. We know, and we've been telling CPS Energy for years, that we have an obligation in this transition to make sure that the lights stay on, make sure that the rates remain affordable, especially for those who are most vulnerable both to this increasingly violent weather as well as any potential price shocks from poorly executed climate plans. We know that powering down requires a plan to move hundreds of workers from the coal plant to better jobs in the clean energy sector. All of this takes planning. It's hard work. In spite of this, the leadership at CPS Energy has refused for years to open their books and have an honest conversation about how we're going to thread this needle together as a city. For many, it's become clear that progress can't be made through continued dialogue alone. A petition drive was launched to move the center of governance of our utility from a board of directors that's operated largely outside of public oversight and certainly public influence to the city council, where for the sake of transparent democratic control. The petition will also force the closure of Spruce by 2030. While CPS, the majority of the local media, and the various chambers of commerce have piled on to bash this initiative, few have taken the time to ask what led to this moment. And they're not asking what kind of knowledge or wisdom has the community brought to this conversation. That communications failure is what's made this video necessary. Let's title it, How CPS Energy Ghosted the Climate Crisis, Duped Our Elected Leaders, and Failed San Antonio. Though CPS likes to assert over and over again that renewable energy and energy storage isn't there economically to replace coal, in an example of both bad faith and bad math, they push forward one of the last, if not the last, coal plants in the United States. And now we're left with a plant, a billion-dollar plant, that they're saying they can't afford to close, when in fact we know continuing to operate, continuing to buy that coal is what's pushing the economic pressure on the city of San Antonio, that we will be losing tens of millions of dollars a year in the decade to come, as opposed to if we invest in renewable energy and energy storage. And Russell Seal is one of the few people in San Antonio that really holds on to this history.
There's two events. We had the Spruce event to build Spruce 2, a new coal plant, the last coal plant to be built. The community fought hard on that and had lost in court, but got agreements to really clean up the existing plants that we had. Cleaning up the Dirty Dilly coal plant, cleaning up Spruce 1, but they never came through with any of the agreements that they made to the community.
The community also pushed back hard on CPS's energy proposal over a decade ago. Again, this is 2007, 8, 9, to double the size of the South Texas nuclear project. And here again, they argued that, that the energy was needed. We found out later it was not. Two, that it was going to be affordable. That early estimates were for about $6 billion. for these two new units. By the time this was over, that price tag had tripled, and it took a whistleblower and a lawsuit to get us out of that deal while CPS lost the community over $600 million in the process.
They know and lie about the cost of the nuke. When they originally told us it was going to cost like 6.8 billion, then 9 billion, then 13 billion, and then right as we are putting out the bonds the day before, an NRC insider comes out and says CPS knows this is going to be $19 billion. Paul Williams was the CFO of CPS Energy, the highest ranking official, right under Chief Operating Officer, Chief Financial Officer.
So 2017 rolls around, and Donald Trump announces he's beginning to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Well, communities like San Antonio around the country, counties, sovereign tribes, churches, big businesses are all saying, hey, we're still in this. We're still going to fulfill our obligation to the rest of the world and work together to avert climate crisis. As this declaration is being announced, CPS Energy steps forward, surprising most of those in attendance with this generous offer to underwrite the entire climate planning process. And they stay pretty, removed from the process. They don't have anybody at the table. They have somebody in the wings if there are questions. But one thing they don't do is the one thing that we ask them to do over and over again, including those of us on the steering committee, members of the Buildings and Energy Committee, and that is provide data about the coal plant. Here's what that frustration looked like at one meeting.
It strikes me as odd that in this conversation where we've gone through this detailed process to get a greenhouse gas inventory that is scientific in nature, there's no transparency or review of that data, which would take place in a normal scientific process. And so it's fine if you guys want to say, look, the process is cut off, we're not moving forward, but for the steering committee to be able to have access to that data and at least understand, okay, what did we get in this inventory and what did we not get, and what is the actual number that's associated with something, not just the percentage.
If people ask for something and they don't get it because you guys don't want to spend a lot of time on it, that we're going to keep having these conversations. And we're going to be wasting our time having these conversations instead of you guys wasting your time answering questions.
But the city makes a fair point. They only have so much staff time. So
I get it.
So one of the first things that happens in the development of a climate plan is creating the inventory of greenhouse gases, right? You need to know what your target is. If you've got to get to zero by X date, how are you going to get there? And that's why having CPS data is so important. One of the frustrations that struck folks who were serving on the climate plan development is not only the lack of data, but then later seeing that a third of CPS's total emissions are being discounted, that there's a decision made that in order to compare, the structure of our plan to fit, what other cities are doing, that we're only going to consider a certain amount of emissions that are generated in San Antonio, but if we're selling them to people outside of San Antonio, not being considered. So there's over 4 million metric tons of CO2 every year that we're not counting for the new climate plan committees coming in to actually work on policy. Strongly suggest you look at CPS's full emissions, get that into the inventory, and look at area industry. Here we'll see that capital cement, 500,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases, not included in the inventory. Across town, Alamo cement, almost 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas, not included in the inventory. And granted, that's getting into the bureaucracy kind of a plan creation process, whether that's CPS or a sustainability office or the mayor's office or what other kind of interests are moving and pushing here. But where we see CPS assert itself is after this plan is published and before it finally gets passage at the level of City Council. So here's Paula Gold-Williams writing to the Sustainability Office in April, a letter that the steering committee would not receive until August, when it was too late to really do anything about. rejecting this idea that there would be a committee to help CPS Energy reduce their emissions. Rejecting this language of eliminating fossil fuels in favor of a reduction in carbon. And rejecting a call for switching from gas to electric in existing buildings, rushing to the defense of the restaurant and culinary community. Needless to say, all of these recommendations are adopted, are in the second version before we know what hit us. So clearly the interests of CPS Energy, of CPS's CEO Paula Gold-Williams, were centered in this work from the beginning. Even the Express News editorial board picks up on this and says, I wonder why we're not talking about coal in our climate plan. Citing that April letter, they say, oh, well, clearly, here's the issue. They've been fighting this plan the whole time. In a document that talks about buildings and transportation and landfills as the primary sources of emissions, even the CPS Energy Board of Trustees get confused. And with a remarkable back and forth at one board meeting with board members saying, well, we can't do anything about this. Why are you showing us this plan? We're already at zero. This doesn't have anything to do with us. It's about buildings and cars. So now you kind of have this amazing situation where CPS Energy's leadership has done such a good job of hiding themselves, obscuring themselves within the climate plan, that they're forced to turn around and try to convince their own board that they exist within this emissions, this world of emissions, and that those emissions are actually pretty significant. Here's Ron Nirenberg, who, responding to an international moment and community effort to get climate change action and launch this climate plan, believing that the existing structural processes were the way to go, processes that had been disadvantaging community for years before he came into office. We didn't get the plan that we wanted. We got less advertised interim targets of 2030 and 2040 along the road to 2050, which are going to be critically important in holding CPS accountable. But now, with passage, Ron begins to suggest that it's time we can really get to work. And his success is really going to be found in the ability to realize the substance of this quote, the fulfillment of this promise that he made to a reporter at the San Antonio Business Journal. By all appearances, CPS today is feeling no pressure to get to work on Spruce. Relationships between the community and CPS are breaking down, between the community and the mayor's office are breaking down. And what have we gained through these legitimized channels? We still have no community energy planning process. So while the environmental justice, the climate justice communities are being treated in local media as unreasonable or needlessly provocative, the fact is we went through Spruce, we went through STB, we went through this climate planning process and out the other side and still don't have a partner within CPS Energy to plan, to understand a pathway off of coal in San Antonio. And yet we did continue to meet with them asking consistently for this information. When they actually stepped up and offered something to us, it was probably a 5-minute presentation by now a former senior staffer who said, we were working with a retirement by 2025 scenario. We took these numbers, we ran them through some of our projections. We realized that, we need to look at other scenarios, put in other variables, ran those through, and this process kept repeating itself until ultimately we were told the data that they had was meaningless. So how is it that Paula Gold-Williams can now come to the community and say, hey, making this change is going to cost every one of you $20 more on your bills per month? And how is it that she can do that and not be challenged in the press? Where's the data? So here's the kind of not very helpful data seeming material that's shared at the CPS Board of Trustees, we see number one right off the bat. Let's talk about San Antonio and Austin. This purport to show average monthly bill in San Antonio and Austin. Number one, in Austin they have a progressive rate structure. If you keep your energy use under 500 kilowatt hours in a month, you're paying roughly 3 cents per kilowatt hour, as opposed to San Antonio's 7. If you keep it under 1,000, that 500 to 1,000 tranche there, you're paying about 6. So no contest. Next, we see Paula talking about this tripling of conservation spending, $7 more on an average bill. One, I don't know anybody advocating a tripling of conservation spending, but I certainly don't see a dialogue about, hey, what if we doubled our conservation spending, and what if we partnered with the city of San Antonio in jobs creations related to weatherization of homes? What if that doubling of conservation spending also kept 10,000 more people in their homes, able to keep up with their bills? What's the value of that? And then we see this plus accelerating coal unit retirements. We're going to see another $12 on our average monthly bill because of accelerating coal unit retirements. Before this should ever be reported, we really need to know, is Paula talking about retiring both Spruce units in 2021, 22? One unit in 21, one in 25, both in 25? There are major economic differences between retiring 2 units in 1 year, or 1 in 5 years, or 2 in 10 years. This is the sort of information that really matters. So there's definitely been this falling out with CPS and the community based not only upon these years of failing to provide the information we need to make critically important decisions for our community, but then to use the ignorance that failure, that refusal generates to kind of weaponize that ignorance against your own community to spin the stories you want to tell.
You're mad because I won't speed. I won't break the speed limit because of the urgency. You're angry because you want me to go faster. I don't know what to do with that except, well, I'm going to go as fast as I can, and I can go faster with your help, but I'll go slower with your frustration.
So here's Dee Dee Balmeros, a public citizen who's been really a leading force behind this petition effort, this initiative petition effort to force the closure of Spruce by 2030, move the governance of CPS Energy to the City Council, and you can expect that this will be on the ballot in May of 2021. I'm expecting more conversation on this at the bottom of this show, so sit tight.
It's been 10 years that we've been meeting, discussing, and asking CPS Energy to develop a path to a more sustainable future for San Antonio without coal. They've been an unwilling partner for so long. The climate crisis isn't going to slow down. It's getting worse, and CPS Energy needs to take responsibility as our utility to develop solutions to keep the community safe. So that's why we're here. This is how we got to this point. They've really left us no other choice.
While the struggle over the governance at CPS Energy plays out through this petition drive, there are a number of reforms that could and should be enacted now. And this council would be surprised, I suspect, to find out that there are tens of thousands of San Antonians who have their power disconnected every year for their inability to pay. This CEO has doubled the number of forced disconnections. This is 2003 to 2019. You'll see the last 4 bars here. That's Paula Gold Williams' watch, where the disconnections doubled. Some may think, oh, this is an economic case. Well, here's the unemployment rate going back to 2003. You'll see that these last 4 years not only had the worst disconnections in terms of pure number, but are also took place during a period of very low unemployment. When the utility stopped disconnecting families from water and power because of the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, Paula's message to the media was frequently something like, Oh, we don't disconnect people when it's too hot, or we don't disconnect people when it's too cold, or ending disconnections or putting a pause. That's not new to us. This chart shows the disconnections for the summer months of June, July, and August from 2016 to 2019. The top numbers are the average daily highs month to month. The other numbers are the disconnections. Those disconnects do not stop when it's hot. We have got to stop punishing and reinforcing poverty by ending forced disconnections in San Antonio. We can build upon the better programs at CPS like home weatherization and neighborhood solar to create opportunities for families and keep them safe in their homes. And we must reject Paula's argument that big businesses deserve to pay lower rates than working families. No rate hikes until the rates are fair. Clearly, we need to be discussing community planning around shutting down the coal plant and moving all the way to 100% renewable power.
I'll go slower if we're arguing instead of getting things done. Tell me, why do people argue?
Any other questions from the board?
Differences of opinion, but we don't want to argue.
So anyway, I wanted to bring in a few friends. We've had some struggles with the tech, and hopefully things are working out now. Today some of you guys have been watching. The city's been putting out their presenting and rolling out more officially the new climate planning process. We've got some new committees after building this thing. Now they're intended to put it into play through these like quarterly meetings, and they've been doing some equity training already, I understand. And I think Chrissy watched some of those. I'm going to do my best to bring her in. You're way down. Can you get your head up there? I think you're live. How you doing?
Okay, how are you? Is that better?
I hope you don't have that lag we had before, but let's see. So you were watching this morning.
Yeah, I saw the mayor's remarks. They were very general. They were not specific to anything that we heard today. Mm-hmm. Not really. And I watched Doug with the Sustainability Office facilitate a nice conversation that also dealt in some pretty broad generalities. And he talked a little bit about fossil fuel transition. I got pretty excited, and I was like, we're going to hear about it. And we didn't. I don't think the word coal was mentioned once in the 40-minute presentation. And it's just like, are they gaslighting us? Do they want us to pretend that this coal plant doesn't exist? It's kind of outrageous at this point. When they know, like city officials know, CPS Energy knows, everybody knows, hopefully at this point, that the city of San Antonio owns a dirty coal plant. And there's no such thing as a clean coal plant. And this plant doesn't pretend to be that. And so I was a little frustrated with that. I thought there was some other good conversation. I do think it's worth a listen, particularly if you haven't been like super in the weeds. I thought it was a really helpful conversation about, where San Antonio sort of fits as part of this American Cities Climate Challenge. But I haven't done an inventory of all the other cities that are part of the American Cities Climate Challenge. But I would ask that that the folks that run that challenge maybe have a look-see and see which of them have actual coal assets that maybe don't have retirement dates. And so City of San Antonio kind of stands alone out there as a municipally owned utility that has a municipally owned utility that doesn't have retirement dates for its coal. Mm-hmm. It's kind of outrageous. And so, that was my initial take. And there's a whole bunch of other videos that I haven't had a chance to get through because they sort of released them in this big expectation that we were going to sit and watch YouTube videos all day in this very non-participatory fashion. Comments were disabled on the YouTube videos. Keep them to yourself. Yeah. So I don't know what the town hall is going to be like this evening, but I am excited that I hope people will be able to participate. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I should say I checked in with Doug last night. The inventory, and some of us were really loud about this when, as this was happening, really convicted at the time and still are that we could have created as owners of our own, electric and gas utility. We needed to account for that in a real way, and didn't, but again, that was a modeling decision, I guess. And so we're looking forward to this round, a dialogue about, how do we, build that up and be more transparent. And so I believe that the spruce 4 million metric tons stay off the books, but the cement plants I talked about earlier, I believe those are going on. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about how to do an inventory or the importance of having that clearly communicated.
I think my thoughts are a little bit even higher level than thinking about an inventory. I think that when you think about the climate action planning process and when cities do this work, sometimes in Texas it's challenging because cities don't own their own utility infrastructure. So Houston, Doug alluded to Houston's climate planning process and some of the I don't know how he framed it, some of the messaging that he thinks is positive about the transition. And he maybe alluded to some of that the city of Austin and their climate planning process is moving up to 2040 net zero date. And what is really remarkable about a city in Texas and what is called a deregulated utility market or electric market that owns its own infrastructure is you get to be the deciders. This is the city of San Antonio's asset. The coal plant belongs to each and every person in San Antonio, and that whether you like it or not. And if you don't like it, as Mayor Bloomberg said, who apparently was surprised that one of his shining cities, or that's maybe Environment Texas, owned a dirty coal plant. And so that is, and you did a really good job asking questions about that at that press conference. And it is, I think that's the way to think about it is this is an asset that the city owns. And so to pretend that it isn't not only powering the whole city, but helping provide stability to the electric grid across the state of Texas in a way that is sort of just out of our hands, we can't do anything about it is pretty obnoxious. And the reality is that the city of San Antonio, like every other utility out there, like every other city out there that is decarbonizing, can make those decisions and put things on a time frame. And it is too bad that Spruce was built so recently. CEO Paula Williams suggests, it's only been around 10 years, but very few people are asking for it to be shut off tomorrow. People are asking for a phase out plan and something that resembles a commitment. We don't even have that for Spruce 1, which, by the way, doesn't have any pollution control for NOx in a city that has an ozone problem and is a non-attainment for ozone. And their answer to that is we'll retire in a decade. And that's just also unacceptable. Yeah. And so we have those kind of these putting on blinders and not facing the reality that you've got an ozone problem in Texas. You have all the capacity in the world, meaning you get to choose your own future in the city of San Antonio in a way that someone in Dallas doesn't. They don't have the kind of control over their utility because they don't have a utility. They have a retail provider. Mm-hmm. And then finally, just in the context of the climate action planning, this is the last decade to make meaningful change. It really is, to fight the worst impacts of climate change. And without a way to push back, to actually take something by the reins and say, we're going to make this huge reduction in fossil fuel consumption and fossil fuel use, that they act like it's out of her hands. Paula Williams acts like it's out of her hands, and it's just not. Other utilities are doing it. They're making these decisions, and the technology to replace it can be put into the planning process. And we've been hearing the same thing in the most recent, editorial out of the Express News, or the piece about, the debt associated with Spruce that we've been hearing for the last 5 years. Their answers haven't changed, even though the data has changed. And, entities like Sierra Club or AIFA or different consultants have been coming forward with funded by not the city of San Antonio and CPS, like here's a bunch of work. Please use it and tell us why you're not doing resource planning that takes this into account.
Yeah, and the communications, the outward going communications from CPS have really gotten bad, and I don't see them being challenged, unfortunately, in those who are charged with disseminating good information in the community to make these kinds of decisions. So rarely, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But
a good example of that is the Flex Path itself. It's a very beautifully manufactured, shiny product that seems to be a substitute for more transparent, a transparent resource planning or rate making process that the city of San Antonio deserves. I don't know if this language is made up 100% in a consultant's office, but it just is confusing. I work in this field. It's my job to understand this stuff. And I literally have to go back and be like, okay, which kind of flex product are we talking about for which thing? When it's really just a resource planning. It's just a way to obscure what resource planning is and suggest that like this flexible path exists instead of making any firm commitments or creating goals that are achievable. Yeah. All resource planning is iterative, right? Like other utilities do it. They put out a plan, they revisit it year after year in a very public and transparent way. And if something needs to be accelerated or bumped back, they'll do it, but they'll do it with stakeholder engagement, and that's just not happening. And and the last thing I'll say is like other utilities are making decisions on coal plant retirement and then making it happen as part of their resource planning process because they're facing the facts that this is just a thing that has to happen. How do we do it in a way that doesn't hurt low-income ratepayers, that doesn't, that creates an opportunity for a just transition for their employees and for folks impacted by this pollution? And it's doable, but if you just decide on the opposite, it's too expensive and the technology doesn't exist, you won't go through the process of coming up with the right answer or an answer that can be at least debated.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to get into that with Dr. Meredith McGuire, Professor Meredith from Trinity University. Chrissy, thanks for joining me. I'm going to flip the channels. Good to see you doing well and talk with you soon. Where are we? There we are. So yeah, as Chris was talking about, I mean, it's interesting in that since the launch of this petition, there's been a very public challenge and a struggle to respond, and to respond to that, I think, within CPS and elsewhere, the development of the NOPE campaign, and all that. But it's been really, really disheartening to see CPS take an overtly partisan position on this campaign, which maybe isn't surprising, but the way they're using, like I was talking about earlier, the way they're using information now, it's not just, in my opinion, spinning that information so much as manipulating it in defense of existing inequities, and rates are a big part of that. So I do want to bring in Dr. McGuire. Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you again.
Hi. Go ahead.
No, please introduce yourself and thoughts on this issue.
Great. So I'm Meredith McGuire, a recently retired professor at Trinity University. I've been working hard on issues related to both the rates at SAWS and also at CPS Energy. Right. And this entire crisis right now is highlighting some of the issues around rates because we're seeing that some of the same people who are especially vulnerable in the face of COVID are also the people who are at risk of being evicted or somehow displaced. And so we're in a period of crisis and on the verge of we're probably already in a major economic depression. So I think that's a special reason why we need to be looking carefully at the rates that our public utility is forcing on people.
Absolutely. I wanted to bring up a couple of slides. So I know this is going to feel maybe in the weeds or wonky or whatever, but I think we can explain pretty clearly, succinctly what we're looking at in terms. So these are, this is Paula Gold-Williams' most recent presentation to the Board of Trustees at CPS. working hard to defend existing rate structures that benefit big business at the expense of the rest of us. So can you maybe do some interpretation here?
Right. So one of the things that CPS is doing in this slide is trying to make it look like customers are such a big chunk of who they're serving, but the customers are not paying enough revenue. The implication is contribute less than 50% of all revenue. But it's very interesting that this slide doesn't show anything at all about how much energy the businesses are using. And the fact of the matter is that many of the businesses are using thousands of times as much energy as a household resident, and so forth. So they should be paying far more. Right now, the businesses have a rate structure that allows them to pay a half as much per kilowatt hour of what the residential ratepayers have to pay, and that's grossly unfair.
Yeah, one of the things I did after a recent conversation we had, I did similar to the way I was mapping out the cement plants. I looked at data centers all around San Antonio, and the information, most of them did not share information, but what they do is supply power, right? What they're doing is supplying energy to clients who want to host these big banks of computers and what servers and what have you. And it's quite a lot of power.
Yeah.
And not a lot of employment.
Yes, they don't necessarily have very many employees involved at all, because all it is sort of maintaining all these machines that are continually doing calculations. And basically, this is the source of all of the cloud data material and all the different things that we do. For example, this telecast is very much supported by data centers. So to have those facilities using so much energy, literally millions of kilowatts a month in some cases. Mm-hmm. There are some big data centers that are using as much energy as Spruce 1 puts out. That's a lot of energy. Incredible. Yeah.
Can you look? So we've got another slide here. Do you want to do a little interpretation?
Right. So let me just make sure I've got the right slide on my own notes here. So this is the kind of chart that they would be looking at if they were doing a rate structuring process. And this is it's a very, very, very bad approach to making rates, because it forces everybody into one of two categories. They could create other classes, but they deliberately don't, because this way it can be the residential ratepayers versus everything else. And so what they do then is that they look at previous data and they try to say, how are we going to change the rate structure? Like, where shall we increase the percentage that people have to pay, by looking at the past and the present and try to see how the proportion has changed. In a lot of cases, that means then that what happens is that the residential ratepayers, who overall are actually reducing their usage in the recent years, they end up looking like they aren't paying their fair share because we're doing the right thing. Whereas the businesses who profit from increasing the amount that they use and do, they're eager to, if necessary, use a lot more energy so they can make more profit. And so right now, to give them the advantage of saying, oh, well, look, the residents aren't paying as much as they used to pay, so we have to change the rates so that they now pay more. Mm-hmm. And that is really, really unfair. Mm-hmm. It also really is the case that almost all of these rate structures, because they are using a declining rate structure, it's all going to definitely hurt the residential ratepayers because because they end up being stuck with the remainder of this. So the cost of service approach is a very bad one, and it relies too much upon averages. And of course, the averages don't then take into account the extreme heavy usage by, for example, those data centers who are using enough that they would say, oh, you can't put down that coal-fired power plant. I need all that energy to keep my business going.
Now I've got one more slide. I've got a couple folks, a couple community members, community organizers I wanted to talk to in a minute, but we've got one more slide to throw up. Do you have just one more minute?
Sure.
Okay. So here again, this is what are we looking at?
So notice there that CPS is saying on averages, business pay a much higher monthly bill than residential customers. I bet almost everybody watching this knows exactly what the hitch is. Well, of course, the residential customers don't need as much energy, and so their bills are going to inevitably be much smaller, and they'll be even more small when people are doing more energy saving. On the other hand, if we were to take let's take that data center, okay? If we were to work out what their monthly bill would be, according to, hold on, I have to pull out my notes here. According to the current rate structure for businesses, that data center using 500,000 kilowatt hours a month would have to pay a total of $16,951.50. That would be there. That would look really impressive, wouldn't it? Oh, look how much more businesses are paying. Well, if they were paying at the same rate that the residential ratepayers are paying, they would actually have to be paying $34,550. So that's really what the fair share is. The fair share is for the businesses that are using the most to pay their fair share.
Yeah, this is the ultimate kind of trickle-down theory when it comes to power generation and consumption, isn't it? And I'm reminded, just closing out here, of, Paula had been for a brief minute, like the head of the local Chamber of Commerce while they began to fight paid sick time efforts here in San Antonio. Obviously, there's a lot of conflict of interest built in when it comes to rates as well. So incredibly important that folks organize and mobilize now to fight an expected rate increase this coming year. It may come quick. So I really encourage folks to connect with one another and organize to push back on that until we get a new rate structure for San Antonio.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming in, Meredith. I always look forward to talking with you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So I've got Alex Bernal in the wings here with Move Texas, and they've been a real critical partner in this the initiative petition that would again force the governance from the Board of Trustees over to the council, create a committee over there, force the closure of Spruce by 2030, and deal with these rates as well. And Anakwa Garcia from Southwest Workers Union. Let me see if I can get you both in here, and we can squeeze in. Yeah, everybody's here. Hey, Anakwa, Alex, how are you guys doing? How are you both doing? Doing well? Doing well. Let me, Anakwa, I wonder if you would first introduce yourself. I'm really interested, and whenever I talk to people who are active in this kind of work and active in community mobilizing, organizing, where the impetus first developed, and what were you observing in your life that made you want to engage socially and politically?
Hi, my name is Anatwa. My pronouns are she and her. And I think, thinking back to how I started, community organizing, I think, was, feeling the massive injustice of daily life, and then feeling like I needed to do something. At that time, when I made this decision, I was actually a reporter, and I was having a lot of conflict of interest, reporting and organizing at the same time. And I started doing electoral work in 2014, and I think that was a really big eye opener. That election work it doesn't go deep enough, and so I think that's where the community organizing has led me into like deeper pockets of issues that we are trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. In entering, and I guess maybe a similar question for you, Alex, if you would introduce yourself and also kind of where you're at now, but also kind of where you started seeing or experiencing these connections.
Sure. So my name is Alex Burnell. I'm the advocacy manager at Move Texas. My pronouns are he, him. And when we started to organize around CPS Energy issues was the development and eventual passage of the CAAP. And right away, we started to realize that in the CAAP, there were severe omissions in terms of people being able to assess the state of carbon in the city, that certain bad actors were getting a pass, and that if young people, the people that we work with, were serious about climate change, it meant we needed to confront the utility for running this coal plant, for burning this coal. We know that the fires in California and the floods in Houston are not accidents. They're a reflection of greenhouse gases in the air. And here locally in San Antonio, that coal plant is, as you mentioned in your video earlier, a huge culprit of those greenhouse gases that are trapping the heat and leading to extreme weather. So, this is part of joining a national conversation with other youth and organizations like Sunrise, but it's also about joining with organizations like Southwest Workers Union, Public Citizen, Texas Organizing Project, San Antonio DSA, and Texas Rising, and building community power on the same basis that we recognize the climate crisis is real, that our utility doesn't seem to have the same urgency that we do, and that as young people, we step up, we organize when that's the case. So that's what brought us here.
Thank you very much. I mean, just everybody that's involved, I appreciate that work so much. Anako, would you maybe speak to the question of CPS, how you personally, how SWU on this campaign, the current campaign, have identified those needs and maybe the rationale for moving forward in the way that folks have?
Yes, Greg. I think for Southwest Workers Union, we have a hard line on not sacrificing communities and on not sacrificing the climate. And we see the climate action plan and the actions by CPS as greenwash band-aids that are false solutions to the climate crisis. And we bring like global context into the organizing work from our alliances with Grassroots Global Justice Alliance and the Climate Justice Alliance. And so we know that the coal plant is bad and that we need to close it. And we know that the climate action plan is built on carbon neutrality and carbon offsets and the carbon market. And we know that those are all false solutions. And we know that techno fixes, cap and trade, carbon capture and sequestration are not good for our communities. And so we need real solutions, right? And listen, we love science. We think science is hot, but we can't wait for these techno fixes that don't even exist yet to come and save us from the climate crisis. We think the only solution is to keep these fossil fuels in the ground. And we need bold climate science in order to save San Antonio and the planet.
For sure. I wonder if either one of you would want to speak to the thing that I always am struck by. I read a report maybe from the IPCC, or even if you get into the footnotes a little bit of this climate plan, they both recognize that a big part of this success has got to be by addressing consumption. So in the way I was talking with Meredith about these massive power users and how they kind of gotten off, obviously coal isn't being held to account, the cement plants and industry haven't been held to account, the data centers and these big users are all privileged in the rate structures, and really just the lifestyle people aspire to. If you look across the palatial kind of north side primarily, we don't win, we don't protect each other unless we also look at these issues, the issues of growth and consumption. I don't know if either one of you want to run with that, Alex.
Yeah, definitely. So it's important to recognize that this is a fight embedded in a deeper historical story in the city of San Antonio of segregation and inequality. We live in a city where in one zip code you have a life expectancy much higher, and then in another zip code you have a life expectancy of 15 years less. And so these are really the manifestations quality of life that inequality produces. And so, exactly as you lay it out, Greg, the differences in lifestyle and the reduction of the environmental conversation to questions of lifestyle. Certainly, we need to talk about differential consumption and the lionization of sort of luxury and opulence, comfort. Well, so many others in our city suffer from lack of health care, low wages, lack of paid sick time. But at the same time, it is people. And so at the same time, we need to look at the coal plant and the utility as a key factor in the equation and not individualize the problem. Knowing that half the city's emissions are basically accounted for by one entity really makes that stark and clear. So, yeah, I totally agree with you, Greg.
I've been struck by through this COVID period, the inability, unwillingness, or just the fact that the city's overlooked all the types of solutions that are found in community, that are found in through energy justice and climate justice work. That, for instance, and a DSA account here was talking about these interconnected struggles. We know that that the Latinx community of San Antonio, low-income community, has been hit real hard with COVID. We know that the coal plant, the particulates. I mean, COVID hitches a ride even on particulates. That you mentioned, the discrepancy, the inequality of the decades less of average lifespan in some zip codes on the south side versus the north side, and it's all so bound up. So I want to recognize that, and if council truly believes that racism is a public health threat, it has an absolute manifestation in energy policy in San Antonio, and the fact that they're not doing that research or fighting to put these realities into policy, that's a continuation of racist policy setting. So yeah, appreciate that. I'd like to invite Anakwa maybe to close out this segment, and then I have I had a conversation with Maria Berriozabal, former city council member and kind of community conscience, that will kind of conclude the broadcast. But Anakwa, would you offer some words in terms of the petition work? I know it's got to be challenging at a period when life is even more precarious, and how people are responding, what messages seem to resonate, and then I'd also invite you to share this event that we have coming up over the weekend.
Of course. Yes, it is an extreme challenge to petition in a pandemic. But we are all in alignment that this petition is necessary work. And so we are being as safe as possible as we interact with community members and voters, socially distancing. We do have a good 20-some canvassers out canvassing and collecting petition signatures. And the response from voters is, one, I'm shocked that we still have a dirty coal plant. And another is also shocked to learn that our rate structure is not fair. And the impact of COVID-19 has really brought forth the reality that our community has in meeting basic needs. And energy, clean energy is one of our basic needs, and we need it to be fair, and we need to make sure that the coal plant closes. And so I think voters are very enthusiastic to sign the petition, and they want to stay engaged and learn more, because I think there's a disconnection from what CPS media puts out and how much of that actually gets to residents at their homes. As mentioned earlier, we have inequality here in San Antonio. There are pockets of the city that don't even have internet connectivity. And so information, the way that we share information, it doesn't work in every community. And that's kind of where we're at, is we're going into these toxic communities, trying to bring the information to them and the knowledge, and at the same time grow our knowledge in the science. And you mentioned earlier that, community voices are not believed, and I think that our lived experiences are not taken as fact, they're taken as opinions, and that is very upsetting for us. And so, we remain vigilant in challenging these structures. And, we have events, our next event is going to be here at our market, the Southwest Workers Union. It's the Commercial Economies Podcast, and it's from 12 to 4 p.m. And we're going to have a drive-through petition event. And we're hoping that anyone who's watching and has not signed a petition can come through, and can also share the information with their friends and families, so they could come through and drive as well. We also have a thriving market, and it's just local artisans who are putting their talents together and selling medicine to the community and their arts and crafts.
One more time, maybe with the address. We're getting a little internet glitchy.
It's going to be Sunday from 12 to 4 p.m. at 1414 East Commerce.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. And we'll add that into the comments too, and links to the event page. I know, Alex, I think you wanted to have a concluding thought here, and then we'll bring in Maria. So, Alex.
Yeah, thank you for that, Greg. I just want to appreciate and echo a comment that Anakwa made about the heart of this campaign. I know that the petitions are being collected by canvassers at great risk to themselves, because we don't have modern systems that really allow folks to do anything but potentially endanger themselves collecting wet signatures out there in public. So I want to celebrate them for participating in local democracy and participating in this campaign. And I suggest that that's really the heart of it. As much as this is about getting something on the ballot in May of 2021, this is also about the thousands of conversations that are currently taking place between those petitioners, these campaigners, these organizations, and the broader San Antonio community, taking people from not knowing about their utility to knowing about their utility and thinking about the climate crisis, because we really do all share the obligation to think critically about it and take responsibility for the ways that we contribute to the climate crisis by allowing this coal plant to remain open. So I just want to celebrate the petitioners and the larger spirit of the campaign for energy democracy and to stop the climate crisis.
Yeah, important to add here that this doesn't end. I mean, it doesn't end. Again, a successful petition drive doesn't end. We have a vote coming up in the coming spring, and even beyond that, it's going to take not just moving governance, but maintaining power, community power to move and control that once that's achieved. And echo again. What you're saying, just a gratitude for those doing the work and encouraging folks to go out, do the drive-through on Sunday, and we'll just keep trying to promote and support each other. Thank you both for joining me, joining Deceleration today. I know we had a real struggle putting the connections, the technology together to make this happen. But you both stuck with it, and I know it's been a benefit to folks who have been able to tune in. So thank you again.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
And so the last comments I wanted to reserve for Maria Barriozabal, a former city council member and real community leader, let's see, closing off this, let me mute a couple channels. And I was talking with her yesterday and was really appreciative of, I know that, so the committees now that are being tasked with moving forward the plan that was built and hopefully improving upon it as we go forward, they have been tasked, and just like the plan itself has a lot of good equity language. Execution is something that I think we all continue to apply pressure to ensure. But all those members are getting equity training, right? There is a separate equity committee from the technical committee. How the power dynamics between those two materialize and manifest is to be determined, I think, as well. And so part of that equity training was a call with Maria. And I really appreciated something that she told me in terms of what she told them. And so I'll close here, just encouraging everybody to stay connected. And I think her message really resonates for those with the committee, is important to hear, and those who are in community and working together and to achieve just ends, and to dampen even just a little bit this global climate crisis and protect our communities. So Maria Barriozabal.
What we see every day, we're working on climate change and housing and all these things. There are a lot of other decisions being made that we had nothing to do with, and they go way back. And that is a structure within what we have to do our work.
Yeah.
So my presentation to them was, this is why the city grew where it grew. And certain people were responsible for that. And then look at all the battles we've had just protecting our water. And I went through all of them. I mean, that's Applewhite, PGA, all that. And I said, and we still lost. We won 2, but we lost all the others. And where we are now is with a question mark that I have. Why on earth was this aquifer protection tax just ended? And with this history of thousands of people involved over a period of 50 years, nobody said anything, and they just took that vote away from us, and we just sat there. And who did it and why? And I still don't know, but I think it's developers who just want to build more. I think that's what it is, because they're still running the city. Okay, that's one point. The other one is that the utilities, water and energy, are the pillars that make the growth and expansion possible. So that was my presentation. So at the end, he's got this, questioning face, and he says, so what do we do? And I think the question comes from somebody hearing something for the first time that essentially has a good heart and is real smart and says, so what do we do? And I receive that question a lot.
I know you do.
And my answer is always, this is all we have. What we have is our body, what we've learned, and that's what we use. And we use it to connect in all our networks with as many people as we can with what we know. And in this city, we haven't quite learned how to reach the masses and to reach the people who need the information. And we have to be creative in how we do it. You know, meeting with friends. And I said, and use the power